Video, I'll be covering the two types of visas that you can get as a student in the United States. And the most important part of this is how this visas gives you the option to work or not. If you're new on my channel, my name is Stephen Ojo, and on this channel, I talk about flight training and aviation. And my goal here is to inform and educate you as to the options you have when it comes to achieving your dreams or your goals as a pilot. Now, this particular subject really applies to a lot of students, whether you are in a flight training program or not, whether you are going to college or not. All right. It depends on what you're trying to pursue long term, but this type of visas do apply to, a lot of international students. So you may also benefit from it, even though your goal isn't to become a pilot or your goal isn't to go to a flight school. Now, one thing I would like to address right away is if you are thinking of working as a student while going through flight training specifically, this is something that is often very difficult and challenging. And don't get me wrong, even going through normal college, like a college, and then working as well a part-time can be difficult. But when it comes to flight training, it's a different level of challenges you experience if you try to work and train at the same time. Not that it's not possible, but it's just that the schedules of your training can often conflict with work, and sometimes you have to fly when the weather is good. You don't control weather, which means you can control your work, you can dictate your work schedule, but you cannot dictate how the weather is when you plan to fly, which means it could lead to more delays in your training. It could make your training way more expensive and so forth. So I wouldn't go into details much about that, but I hope you understand what I mean. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. And of course, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. If you have any questions, please leave it below. The other thing I'd like to address right away is I'm not an expert in immigration laws. So consult your immigration lawyer or attorney, someone that is well versed, and probably that's what they do for a living in this field. So they will be able to provide you with better resources and information. So what am I going to be covering in this video? The first thing is who could be issued an F1 or M1 visa, the employment eligibility, practical training, duration of your visas, or how you can also extend these visas. I'm going to start with the easier one, which is the M1. Now, as you can see, M1 generally applies to vocational students. And the reason is because these are considered non-formal institutions or training. So let's start with the first one, which is the M1 visa. It says here that the M1 applies to students in established vocational or other recognized non-academic institutions other than in language training programs. And as you can tell, it pretty much applies to almost like a non-formal form of education, like a university, a college. For flight training, you can actually you have the option to go F1 or M1. But for this particular situation, for this particular discussion, I'm focusing on the M1 for now. Now, the next question is, what are the employment eligibility for M1? As you can see, it says that M1, except as provided in paragraph M14 of the section, the student may not accept employment. Now, there's a difference between employment and practical training. Whether your field of study or training or the vocational training you're doing applies to that job or not, it doesn't matter. An employment is an employment. So you may be studying to become a pilot, but you're working at a grocery store. You can see that they do not apply at all, but you're employed to work. Now, practical training, on the other hand, says here, when practical training may be authorized, temporary employment for practical training may be authorized only after completion of students' course of study. The proposed employment is recommended for the purpose of practical training. The proposed employment is related to the student's course of study, and upon the designated school officials' information and belief, employment comparable to the proposed employment is not available to the student in the country of the student's foreign residence. Now, I hope this makes sense. So the purpose of a practical training is so that the students can apply what they've studied in real life application, like almost like an internship. So for example, if you finish your training on M1, you can then maybe teach as an instructor for 6 months in a flight school and get paid. All right. So it says there, like, only after completion of students' course of study, that's when you can then apply for what they call the practical training on that M1. Now, the duration of practical training says here, however, a M1 may not engage in more than 6 months of practical training in the aggregate. So the duration of any form of practical training, which is not an employment, although you get paid, if this makes sense, all right? I want to make sure it's clear. Even though you're getting paid, even though it's considered work, it's practical training. That's the term that they use. So that means you can only do this for not more than 6 months. Now, extensions of stay. This only applies to your stay under status. The cumulative of extensions that can be granted to an M1 student is limited to a period of 3 years from M1 student's original start date plus 30 days. So this means that from the time you're admitted into the program plus your training, practical training, you cannot stay on an M1 for more than 3 years plus 30 days. All right. And that's really it for M1. M1 is very restrictive and very limiting. All right. And that's why I often encourage people to go to F1. On the other hand, let's focus now on F1. With F1 visa, this applies to academic and language students. And it says your students in colleges, universities, seminaries, conservatories, academic high schools, elementary schools, other academic institutions, and in language training programs. This makes sense. So for example, someone that is coming for a college program, a university program, a degree program, these are the people that would apply for the F1 visa. When it comes to employment, grants you the ability to work either on campus or off campus. But to start with the first one here, on campus, you're able to work on campus in different scenarios. In this case, you can only work, it says in any event, the employment must be an integral part of students' educational program. Employment authorized under this paragraph must not exceed 20 hours a week while schools is in session. On the other hand, when the school is not in session, the student can work full time, which is 40 hours per week, generally. And that is for the on-campus work authorization. And now for off-campus authorization, it says a student may be authorized to work off-campus. I need to move that a little bit. Off-campus on a part-time basis in accordance with the paragraph. It says part-time off-campus employment authorized under this section is limited to no more than 20 hours a week, which is the same as the people that are working on campus. A student is granted off-campus employment authorization may work full-time during holidays or school vacation. So this is again, one of the benefits of the F1 visa. Now think about this. As a student that is in a college, then you need to think about the employment opportunities that are available to you. And that's why you want to consider, again, going for an F1 program or F1 visa that gives you the ability to either work, for example, on campus or off campus. And this is employment now, all right? But again, it has to be an integral part of your program, however the school decides to apply that. Now, when it comes to F1, there's what they call the severe economic hardship, which you can use if for any reason you're unable to work on campus or the school is not providing employment, because remember, there has to be a space for you to work in order for you to be employed, right? So if you can prove that you're experiencing severe economic hardship, then you may be granted the authorization to work. And there are so many situations in which this can be granted. An example is loss of financial aid, substantial fluctuations in the value of currency or exchange rate, for example, wars, the fact that you've lost support from home when it comes to funding your education. Scenarios like this can lead to what you can use in order to be able to apply for work. The next one here is the optional practical training. Now, when it comes to employment, remember, like I mentioned with the M1, employment can be in any field, all right, outside of your course of study. But when it comes to optional practical training, under the F1, it's similar to, it has to be related with what you are in the program for or in the school for. And it says here, consistent with the application approval process in paragraph, a student may apply to the USCIS for authorization for temporary employment for optional practical training directly related to the student's major area of study. And it goes on to explain further. It says, while school is in session, provided the practical training does not exceed 20 hours a week, or while school is in session. And I think I stopped there because the rest is just a bunch of notes. Now I've gathered all these notes, and I'm going to link them below. You can use the link to go read further. Now there are types of OPT or optional practical training. There is the pre-completion OPT and there's a post-completion OPT. The pre-completion OPT is before the completion of a program, you can pretty much start applying what you are learning. Post-completion means you've completed the program and now you're working. Now, there's some limitations as to how much you can work. In the pre-completion, you're only limited to work 20 hours or less per week while school is in session. You may work full-time when school is not in session. With post-completion, it says here, you may apply to participate in post-completion OPT after completing your studies. If authorized for post-completion OPT, you must work part-time 20 hours per week or full-time. But the reason why this is important is if you start to use some of your optional practical training duration or time that is allowed, if you use it during the before you've completed a program, that means by the time you apply for the post-completion, the amount left for you to be used is limited. We're going to get to that in a second. Another type of practical training that is available to F1 students, which is the curricular practical training. Differences, I feel they are more, in my opinion, the curricular practical training is more restrictive, but I'm going to read it. It says students who have received 1 year or more of full-time curricular practical training are ineligible for post-completion academic training. On the other hand, when it comes to the optional practical training, the one here, the one above, you have the option to go pre-completion or post-completion. You can kind of start working before you finish a program and even after you finish a program. But with the curricular practical training, you are only limited to just that 1 year or more full-time curricular practical training are ineligible for post-completion. So there's no post-completion academic training in CPT or the curricular practical training. It says here, curricular practical training is defined to be alternative work study, internship, cooperative education, or any other type of required internship or practicum that is offered by sponsoring employers through cooperative agreements with the school. I haven't really seen this being used among students in general. I mean, even when I was a student, but this is something that is available. A student must complete all practical training within a 14-month period following the completion of study, except that a 24-month extension, which is in pursuant of this section, which is right below here, which I'm going to get to, then you're limited to 14 months. All right. Now, there's a 24-month extension. It says a 24-month extension of post-completion OPT for a science, technology, or STEM, in this case, science, technology, engineering, or mathematics degree. Now, here's the thing. If you are already doing some pre-OPT or post-OPT, the time that you spend during those OPT programs all are aggregated together. So that, which means, if you've used 6 months, you're only going to be left with 18 months during your if you use 6 months during your pre-completion, you're probably going to be left, you're only going to be left with about 18 months at the post-completion, so if that makes sense. So at the end of the day, you have a limited amount of time. But with F1, it gives you the ability to at least be employed, and it also gives you the ability to have what they call the practical training, whether it's the CPT or whether it's the OPT.